Hello friends, welcome back. Today I want to talk about the language of visual statements, or the grammar of images. Each image is a visual statement, and the visual statement simply says something, which is so-called signified. Technical term means meaning. You gotta carry a meaning in your visual image, or the story. What is a story? A narrative. Some people say narrative is story. Not necessarily just a narrative. Story has 4 components. Any story, any good story, gotta have 4 components. Character, the conflict or conflicts, struggle or struggles, go or goes. So in other words, you gotta have a character or group of characters. And then there are some external and internal conflicts. Your characters or your character struggles to resolve these conflicts. Through the struggle, you realized a certain meaning. Universally, the meaning can be universally or it can be individually. So any good story, if you look at the stuff that was told long ago, like Homer's Odysseus, you gotta have, he's got a big character, Odysseus, and there are a number of conflicts Odysseus has to go through to get home from Troy. And through these conflicts, he struggles all the way until he gets home. Even at home, he has to kill his wife's suitors all the way. And it tells us the meaning, the story told at least to Greek children or Greek people, ancient Greek people, the meaning. And the meaning is excellence. The excellence is not the fancy English word, but the Greek definition of excellence. Excellence means you do the right thing at the right time to achieve the right goal. That can be building a boat, sailing around the world, kill your wife's suitors, or cheat gods, such as Cyclops, or sleeping with goddesses in order to get you home. The photography has a lot to learn from the old art. And this is a particular very famous painting from Vermeer, and it's called The Lace Maker. Vermeer was a 17th century Dutch painter. And this particular painting told us one thing: shallow depths of field. You see her face? Half of her face is not in focus, while the other half is. How can that be? It basically confirms Vermeer used a lens to create this image. So in other words, Vermeer was a photography, not necessarily in today's photography, the sense of photography today we use, but he probably used the camera obscura. Camera is a Greek word, means a vaulted roof, chamber or something, a room or house. Obscura is a Latin word for dark. So in other words, it's a dark chamber. In other words, they build a tent, a small tent with dark fabric. And in the front of the tent, with a small opening, they mount a lens. And at the back of the tent, they have a canvas. So the image goes through this lens, created an upside-down image on the canvas. As an artist or painter, you quickly trace that image so that you get a lifelike, realistic image, and later you color it. European artists started to use camera obscura or lens to create their images since 16th century. If you really want to learn the visual conventions for creating visual statements, you need to go back to the early pioneers. Because today is a world inundated with too many images. There's no way we can even consume or look at 1% of that. So by going back to the old art, the masters, old masters, you can learn photography, you can learn composition, you can learn all the forms, the metaphors they used, or colors, contrast, highlights and shadows, everything. Those are called forms, signifier, to create meaning, to create the signified. Okay, so today I want to talk about a particular artist. He is so fond of using the contrast between strong shadows, dark shadows, and highlights. And this type of art, there's an Italian word for it. It is called chiaroscuro. Chiaroscuro comes from Latin. Chiaro means clear or bright. Scuro, obscure, which means dark. So it's a light and dark. Also, there's another Latin word into English. It's called tenebrism. Means darkism or tenebrists. The artists like to use this type of fashion to create art called the tenebrists. So today's hero, Caravaggio, was 16th century, 17th century Italian painter. He was not the first, but he was the guy who made chiaroscuro into a mainstream in European art. And he was a heretic painter. His works were commissioned in large part by the Roman Catholic Church for creation of the high art in a movement called Counter-Reformation movement. As you know, in Germany, Martin Luther divided the church, split the church about 16th century. And so in order to win back the believers, Roman Catholic Church, the Vatican, commissioned a large number of fine artwork for religious purpose. Caravaggio was a heretic painter. His works were rejected. Many of them were rejected or criticized, censured by the church because his use of subject matter. Though the church, some people defended him in the church, but for more or less, he was rejected. Or consisted of transposing religious themes into popular tragedies. And this particular work is called Death of Virgin. The problem with this is the model for the subject here was drawn, the prostitute. That's just one part of the story. The second part of the story is the way these people mourned were the way the poor mourn their dead. And that was totally heretic to the church. But that's another matter. I'm not going to talk about that. Today, we're going to talk about what kind of techniques or use of light we can learn from Caravaggio. This particular painting is called Saturn, with the head of John the Baptist. As you can see, the entire background is in shadow. There's nothing you can see. We don't know this is inside or outside, but it looks like inside. Contrast between the shaft of light cast onto the subjects, the head, the shoulder, her neck, her face, and partially a face in shadow. And their eyes, their gazes, you see, here, here, here. Well, the color contrast is very dramatic here. You got this crimson red, and then contrast with green. Red-green is contrasting color. It grabs attention. What else we have? Pretty much neutral color here. The brownish plate, brown. Color palette was well controlled. And look at the quality of light. The quality of light is not entirely harsh and is not entirely soft. It's somewhere in between, you know. So for example, you can tell the shadow here is a little bit soft. Well, the shadow here, a little bit soft. But somewhere else can be, the transition between the shadow and the highlight can be abrupt, sudden. So that tells you it's harsh light. And this particular painting is called Supper at Emmaus. Again, it's interior, a small table, you know, Jesus Christ sitting in the middle. And through the gazes of these three guys, the center, who said you cannot put your subject in the center? Who said that? A lot of so-called common sense or visual grammar, you were told it was you cannot put your subject in the center of frame. It looks static, not dynamic per se. You know, you were told that. But guess what? This is not particularly true, because there are other devices you can use in your frame, such as gazes, to direct the viewer's eye to where you want them to go. And guess what? Jesus Christ, the gaze or gesture says something else. Again, we have soft light through this shaft of light coming in. However, it creates harsh shadows on the wall. Here, a bit harsh, and here is kind of soft. Well, the color here, just like the previous one, red, the green, and green. And red, brown, and brown. Here's another one. This is considered a typical chiaroscuro or tenebrism type of work. The title of this painting is called The Taking of Christ. And you can see the specular highlights on the helmet, on the armor, on the people's forehead. The hands. It all creates a frame. The entire image of the character is Jesus Christ. So we don't know whether this happens indoor or outdoors, but it looks like inside, indoors. And the facial expressions. And this one is called Beheading of Xingqiu. Again, large portion of the painting, the composition, is in shadows. That's why, the people follow this technique, call themselves tenebrists, which is a Latin word for darkists. The people who like to use dark to express. Okay, so the shadows, like the backdrop, and then we have a shaft of light coming in to create us the meaning of the story. And look at the color here. Well, what kind of colors he used. And this is another painting of Caravaggio, and it's called Judas Beheading Holofernes. Entire background falls into shadows. Well, you have three individuals in the frame, and the dynamic is here. The beheading, the blood coming out. And look at her facial expression. Soft light. Look at the shadows, transitions of shadows. And the colors unified. The blood, the red, the brown, and yellow. Okay, a typical work of chiaroscuro, highlights and shadows. This seems like outside, but what do you see? We don't see landscape. And we see a battle scene. And the title is Conversion of St. Paul. Again, look at the quality of light here. And use of colors. And use of shadow and highlights. All their gazes, gestures, and the use of colors direct the viewer's attention to. Here. And lastly, and this image is very famous. It's called The Calling of St. Matthew. Notice that the light kind of like just entered this small room here, creates a very harsh light on the wall. The shadow is very abrupt. Well, there may be tons of decisions goes into this composition here. And you see the Jesus' finger, the hand, Matthew's hand. Two old guys, the tax collectors, and three young guys. These guys refuse to look up. He's counting money, and he's looking at his counting. Matthew points to himself. Is that me you want? He enters the room like a cop for arrest. Look at his hands. And the window. Why he puts a window here? That's a metaphor. Traditionally in painting, windows is either used as source of light or framing some activities or event, exemplary event outside. But not here, not this window. No light enters it. The window is opaque. We see nothing. The use of window here is telling us outside is gotta be threatening. This is the window through which only worst news can come. Using of colors again. Brown, the green, red, yellow, the foreground. We can learn a lot from the painters of past because as an image maker, if you call yourself a serious photographer, you're an image maker. And each image has got to follow a set of conventions or using the so-called well-understood metaphors or signs for you to convey a meaning in your image. Back then, these images were used as religious purpose. Later, this technique, this dramatic use of highlights and shadows, picked up by other artists. You can think of those famous ones like Rembrandt, Rubens, or even later, Goya. So for that reason, Caravaggio is remembered as an innovator in European art. The techniques he used, the dramatic use of highlights and shadows. And you may ask, why? Why? It has everything to do with the artist himself's childhood or personal life. As you know, those people who live even today precariously or are habitually crowded together can develop a phobia about open spaces. And for that reason, the open space can transform their frustrating lack of space or privacy into something assuring. Chiaroscuro allowed him to banish daylight. His use of shadows can provide shelter, just like before walls and a roof came. So whatever and wherever he painted, he really painted only interiors. And he only felt relatively at ease inside, not outside. So in other words, he cast or projected his inner world, his emotions, his feelings, his fear, onto his canvases. And these are the large lessons we can grab from reading older images from our European heritage of visual arts. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time.